All right, we're back and we're picking up where we left off in our slides, talking about control statements, particularly nested control statements. So, control statements, they're known for their ability to make decisions and alter the flow of a program. We know two control statements at this point. The two that we know are if statements and while loops. We're going to learn more. There's more in this category, but that's what we know so far. So that's what we're going to talk about when we're talking about nested control statements. Any control statement can be nested in the body of another control statement, providing additional control over the flow of a program. So if statements are control statements, here I have an if statement inside of an if statement. One thing that I like about this is that a lot of my students just naturally get to this point. Like I'm explicitly telling you that you can do this, but a lot of people are just like, well, sure, why not? And they just do it kind of naturally. Something of note that we have a nested control statement inside of another if statement. You could have statements before and after that, and so really the logic here is pretty deep. Like you can kind of customize this to fit whatever you need to do. Of note, this can go indefinitely. Here I have an if statement inside of an if statement inside of an if statement. There's no really logical reason why this should ever stop. You can do this as much as you want. Here, let's kind of actually put some code behind it instead of just talking about it in an abstract manner. If x is greater than or equal to 1, well, if this is true, I'm going to enter the body, but there's another if statement that I'm checking. It says if x is less than or equal to 10. Well, if that's true, then I reach this point. Notice that in order for me to actually get to this system.out.println line, I need both of these things to be true. That being said, this particular example is the exact same thing as using the AND logical operator. And you may be thinking, well, that's silly. Why would you even show me this? Well, depending on the situation, you may like the look of this. Despite the fact these are the same, I sometimes kind of alternate between the two. I will sometimes nest if statements when I know that an AND logical operator could have accomplished the job. This can get like pretty cumbersome, right? Imagine cramming all of this inside of a single condition. Now imagine that it's more complex than this. And then you start to see why, okay, maybe it makes sense to kind of break it apart. Now, what I'm talking about is nested control statements. And the examples we've seen have just been if statements, but this applies to all control statements. This is probably going to be the most common way that we use this. In fact, we'll code in just a moment using this idea. We have a loop, and inside that loop is an if statement that is nested. Okay, what this means is the if statement is going to be checked with every iteration of the loop. Right? Every time this is true, we enter the body, and we'll check this. And if that's true, we would enter this and do this, and then we're going to check the condition again. So this if statement can be executed multiple times, provided that something is met. This can also occur a little bit less frequently. But we have a loop that only will do if some other condition is met. And this is also possible. We won't do this in this class, but in CSA this definitely happens, where we are actually nesting a loop inside of a loop. Okay, it could actually, and as you can imagine, this could actually go indefinitely. You can put loops inside of loops inside of loops, but nesting two loops is actually extremely common. It's one of the things we need to actually traverse a table, like a grid, some type of 2D array. But with that in mind, the idea that we can nest control statements, we're going to revisit this one. This is going to be extremely common. We're about to do this a bunch. We want to write a program, evens odds, that prompts the user to enter a number n, then prints the numbers 0 through n, indicating if each number is even or odd. Right? Quick reminder, or for some of you, maybe a notification, first time you're hearing it, 0 is an even number. That is actually factually true. I'm an IntelliJ. I want to make a new project by going to File, New Project. We'll go Next. I'm already in my Principles folder, so I'm ready to just name my project Evens Odds. We have our subfolder, so I'm good to go. I'm going to right-click on the SRC, make a new Java class. We're calling that Evens Odds. And I'm ready to implement Scanner, and I'm going to kind of speed right through it. We're going to bring in our main method. We're going to create our scanner. And we're ready to prompt the user. This program indicates, what are we saying? What are we saying here? Prompts user in a number and prints indicating each number is even or odd. This program indicates if the numbers in the range 0 to n are even or odd. Please enter a value for n, and I'm going to use a print here instead of a print line. Again, I still think the fastest way to get that is just do your normal s out and then delete the ln. So this program indicates that the numbers in the range 0 to n are even or odd. Please enter a value for n. We need to actually capture that. So integer n is going to be input.nextInt. Sweet. So with this one, I think it's pretty clear that we should be counting up. Like we're going to be doing an increasing kind of manner. I'm going to start at 0 and go up through n. Note this is inclusive on both sides. Right? It's kind of what our number range means. So I'm ready to start looping. All right? I'm going to plug in my while loop syntax. But I need to keep track of the current number. So I'm going to bring in a counter variable. We're starting at 0, so I'm going to set I to 0. And we will say as long as I is less than or equal to n. The reason I know it's equal to is that this is inclusive, meaning n needs to be part of what I do. Now we're at the fun part. With each iteration, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to use an if statement. Let's go ahead and plug in that syntax. I want to know, is the current number being I, an even number? Maybe I want to know, is it an odd number? How do we know? How do we know if a number is even or odd? Well, we can use modulus to determine that. I can take the current number and mod it by 2. Whenever I divide something by 2, if the remainder is 0, what that means is the number is even. Okay, if this is true, this means I have an even number. So I'm going to print out some type of statement that says that. We're going to say I is even. Otherwise, right, if this is false, I will skip over the body, hit the else, which means that I is odd. I'm going to print out a message to that effect. What's interesting about this whole thing is I'm just checking to see if a number is even or odd, but I'm doing it inside of the while loop, which means this happens with every iteration. Initially, I starts out at 0. Why don't we give n a value? Let's do like 10. Right? Let's say the user wants to know what are the even and odd numbers between 0 and 10. So we're going to start out at 0. We'll ask, is 0 less than or equal to 10? Well, that's true. We're going to take 0 mod 2 to ask, is 0 even? We'll get true from that. So we would enter the body. We would print out that 0 is even. We would skip over the else. We'd be at the end of the iteration. We'd come back up and ask, is 0 less than or equal to 10? You'll notice that I'm missing something after I basically figure out, is the current number even or odd? I then need to increment I, so that on the next iteration, we're going on to the next number. So after my first iteration, after I handle 0, we would increment I. I is now 1. We would ask, is 1 less than or equal to 10? That's true. Is 1 an even number? That's false, so we would skip over this body, we'd come down to the else, and we would print off 1 is odd. Let's see this in action. I'm going to right click in free space and tell it to run. Please enter a value for n. Let's use our test case of 10. And there we have it. 0 is even, 1 is odd, all the way up through 10. Notice that 10 is included, and that is exactly what I want. Okay, I'm going to round this out by talking about a couple places where you could have zigged instead of zagged. We could have checked to see is it an odd number, right? By looking to see if the remainder is 1. That's one way to check. You could say does not equal. That's again checking to see is the number odd. Right, so a couple of different ways you could have done that. Something I would take a look at is that I have the system.out.print line, and this is effectively duplicate code. I'm checking for something, but I'm, no matter what, printing. That's all I'm doing. One route I would consider is maybe with each iteration creating a string. I'm going to call that message. And I'm going to start it out as an empty string. Instead of printing, what I'm going to do is take my message and set it to be something, right? In this case, I is an even number. So what I want to say is something like I is even. Right, notice it's effectively what I would have been printing, but I'm saving it into a string instead. If this is true, I'm going to say something like message is odd. So what I'm doing with the if statement is determining what should my message be. With each iteration of the loop, after I figure out if my number is even or odd, after I figure out what my message should be, I'm going to print off something, but what I'm printing off is message. Okay, this probably doesn't seem like much, not a big difference. Some of you may be thinking that this seems like a lot extra, right? I'm bringing in a variable. That's an extra line of code. I'm having to put the SOP down here, which ultimately is another line of code. But the versatility of this is kind of what's important. While all I'm doing is barely changing the message, you could do a lot more massaging to this to get what you want. So for instance, one thing I could do is note that this I plus, that is duplicate code effectively. Why don't I start my message out as just simply I plus a space, which means what I'm tacking on to my message is an indicator if it's even, an indicator that it's odd. Let's try that. Although right now I'm setting message to be just simply that, and I'm losing this, which is why this is grayed out. What I want to do is take my message and add to it, right? So if I was to just run this right now, you'll see what I mean. I'm going to use a different number here because we have yet to do that. And I'm overriding what my message is by saving this back in. What I want to do is make message what it currently is, which is this, plus this, right? I want message to become what it currently is plus this. I want message to become what it currently is plus this. Let's try that again, and we'll see what the difference is. And then I'll talk about this, because I know some of you, that's already perked your attention. So I'm getting what I want. What am I talking about here? Well, we've actually seen this format before. I want this variable to become what it currently is plus something else. That's interesting. We've actually learned shorthand assignment operators. I could simply say message plus equals is even. That is a shorthand assignment operator for this, right? This that we just did is the exact same thing as this. And I'll actually run it to kind of prove the point. We'll even enter 12 to test again. You'll see that I'm getting the exact same thing. Okay, so what that means is this plus equals shorthand assignment operator, that works even for strings, because ultimately the formatting is the same. Okay, this bit on the strings and the plus equals shorthand assignment operator, I wasn't planning on doing that. Our big takeaway from this video should be the situation where we have nested control statements. I have an if, technically an if else, inside of a while loop. So this is happening with every iteration of the while loop. Every time that this is true, I end up creating a string. I end up checking to see if I is even or odd. I end up printing out a message and then incrementing I before doing it all over again. As you can imagine, there's a lot of control and a lot of different things that you can do with this, and so you're going to see a lot more of this. I'll see you in the next one.